Alright guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to find the area of a circle using radius squares. So before we get to that, we're going to talk about a few basic things. First, you already should know about circumference, being the distance around the circle. So anytime you're trying to go around the circle or measure that distance around the circle, we should be using circumference, which we've already learned is pretty much equivalent to 3 diameters. So whatever the diameter is, the distance across from one end to the other end, you just take 3 of them to go around. So 1, 2, 3, and then a little bit more, which is that 0.14. Okay, so really what we end up doing for circumference is diameter. Let's make that a little smaller for you. It's like a huge. We end up just doing diameter. I didn't change anything. Times 3.14. Or we call that pi. Okay? So that's what we use for circumference. Now, for area, it's going to be a little different. So for area, we're not talking about going around the circle. We're now trying to cover everything in the circle. So area of any shape is really just how many squares fit on the shape. And I'll get a little more into how to do that in a little bit. So I want to talk about just some of the keywords. For circumference, we hear the word around, or it could be a revolution, like a tire going around one time. So revolution, surrounding, all those things. And then for area, you're going to hear words like cover. You're also going to hear things like square feet. And that's, anytime you hear square feet, square centimeters, that is area, because that's how many squares are actually covering those that surface. Over here, you're just going to see just regular feet or inches, no square, nothing, because it's measured in a straight line. So that's the difference between area and circumference of a circle. So now let's get into actually how to find area of the circle. Alright, so we're going to start off really easy. We're going to go area of some basic shapes. So let's do a rectangle real quick. So we got a rectangle. This rectangle would be the dimensions would be 3 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 3 by 6. So if we wanted to count all the squares that cover the rectangle, you would count them all and you would get the total of 18, right? Or you just say there's 3 rows and then 6 columns, so you do 3 times 6, 18. So that's easy. That's rectangle. So the next one, let's get to a triangle. A triangle is a little tougher. You might have the formula memorized, but let's talk about why the formula is the way it is. Because we're going to really use the triangle to help us with the circle here in a second. Let me make this triangle a little easier to see. Alright, there we go. So when we're dealing with a triangle, I can't just count the squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you start to get partial squares. Like this one right here is very, very little. I can't count that square. So what we do to find the area of a triangle is we just use a square basically. We try to make this into a square or rectangle. So what I do is I take, let's say this is my pen. So then we just turn this into, let me see if I can get this here. So I go up and I go across. So like a second triangle, right? So now what happens is this one has a height of 4. You can see it there, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. A length of 5. So in this whole rectangle, triangles are hard, so we just make a rectangle out of it. So we say 4 times 5, and that gives me 20. That's how many total squares for this rectangle. The problem is it's not a rectangle. So when you're done, you do the base times the height, but then you divide it in 2. So we divide that by 2, and you get the answer of 10. So when the squares don't really fit on the shape, we end up using squares and rectangles to kind of help us make sense of it. So that's what we're going to do here on the circle here. So let's go back to this one here. So we have this square here. I mean the circle. So I can't count. I'm not going to try to count that. I can try to count, but there's some pieces missing, overlapping, whatever. So what you have to do, we're going to have to kind of make a square out of it. So that's where that whole term radius square comes from. We're going to make a square out of the radius. And we know the radius is the distance from the center of the circle all the way to the edge of the circle. Okay? So we got that there. So this radius would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This would be a radius of 5, right? So now I'm going to make a square out of that. So what I'm going to do is now I'm going to build upwards all the way to the edge. So there we go. And then we're going to complete the square. So then that one, so obviously this is 5 and it's a square. That means this has to be 5. All right. So now we're going to say 5 times 5 is 25. So 25 represents how many squares actually are in this radius square. Notice we do have some leftovers, right? So we'll get to that in a little bit. So now we're thinking how many total radius squares, how many of these squares would it take to cover the whole circle? Most people understand there will be another one, right? And then let me finish this off. We go there. That's a second radius square, and the area of that one's going to be 25 also. So right now there's 50 total squares, and some of these are kind of hanging off, so don't worry about those. We'll get to those in a second. Next thing is I can get this quadrant right here. So we go here all the way to the edge. Now I just made my third radius square, okay? And then the area of that one, if this one's 25, that one has to be 25, this one has to be 25. So there is that radius square. Now, a lot of people think, okay, let's continue and let's make another radius square. But if I make another radius square, that's 4 radius squares with 25 tiles. When you count the 525, so there's a lot of space. I get overlap, so that's way too much. So 4 radius squares would be too much. So if I did 4 radius squares, that would say this would be 25. So we're saying the total area is 25, 50, 75, 100. But that's not true because I have some squares, like I have 2 whole squares off right here, another 2 whole squares off there. So we cannot do a 4th radius square. So when we're doing area of a circle, we do not have 4. We have to go with just 3 radius squares. Because what happened is, this part of these right here, if we cut this stuff off here, we cut off the white parts here that's outside of the circle, and we paste them in here, it almost completely fills this area, okay? So when we're finding the area, once we cut these off and fill this in, it only takes 3 radius squares. So in order to find the area, you're going to have to do the area of the radius square times 3, because there's 3 of them. 1, 2, 3. Now, just like circumference, where it's a little bit more, there is still a little bit more. So it's 3.14. Okay? So with this one, the area of the radius square times 3.14. So in this case, the area of the radius square was 25. So I would just end up doing 25 times 3.14, and then you would get your answer. Okay, around 75 is. If I had to estimate, 25 times 3 is 75, and then a little bit more, whatever the 0.14 times 25 is. So you would multiply it out, and you would get your answer. So that's how you find area of a circle. You basically take a circle, and you find the radius, and you count it. The radius is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to the end. So now I need to make the square out of it. So you make the square, build the square out of it. You get another 5. Oops. Why is that not working? Do it this, go here. You get another 5. So we get that by doing 5 times 5, because that was 5. This was 5. And this is going to end up giving me equals 25 squares. That's how much it takes to cover the radius square there. So basically what I did there was radius times radius. That's all I did. And then that would be the radius square right there. But then we would need how many of them? That's what you got to think. So I have one of them. My answer can't be 25 because I still have other stuff to cover. I got to cover all this part. So then you got to remember, you need 3 of these radius squares. So now you take this 25, you take the area of the radius square, and then you multiply it times 3. But it has to be a little more, so 3.14. So the area of the radius square again was 25. So we do 25 times 3.14 and you get your answer. And that's how you find area of a circle. Let me know on Google Hangouts if you need any help or more explanation on it.